Keanu Reeves thought he was taking a quiet walk home until a single voice echoing under a bridge froze him in place. A homeless man was singing a song no one had ever heard, one that would force Keanu to make a decision that could change a stranger's life forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The cold November air drifted over downtown Los Angeles, like a reminder that even a city famous for its heat could feel lonely after dark. Neon lights from late-night taco trucks flickered across the wet pavement, casting shimmering reflections that stretched along the sidewalks like soft ribbons of color. Keanu Reeves walked with his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, his pace slow and thoughtful. He had just left a small charity gathering held in memory of a childhood friend, a quiet event filled with stories, music, and the kinds of emotions that linger long after the crowd disperses. It was meant to honor someone he had loved like a brother, and now that the night was ending, Keanu needed a moment alone to let the weight of it settle. His security team waited by the curb as he stepped away from the venue. They knew him well enough to recognize when he wanted space. Keanu assured them he would not wander far, just enough to clear his thoughts. They agreed, reluctantly, staying several blocks behind as he walked into the arts district where the city's murals glowed faintly under streetlights. Keanu had always appreciated these quiet moments more than any fame, any spotlight, any applause. The world expected him to move with calculated caution, but nights like this allowed him to breathe like an ordinary man who simply needed silence. His boots tapped softly along the sidewalk. A few people recognized him from afar but respected his privacy, offering only small nods or gentle smiles. Keanu returned them politely, his eyes soft, his mind elsewhere. The more he walked, the heavier the evening felt, not because of sadness alone, but because loss had a way of stirring memories he kept tucked away. His steps carried him under the Highland Underpass, a stretch of concrete where city light dimmed and sounds echoed differently. Here, the world felt far away. That was when he heard it, a voice deep and unpolished rising from somewhere in the shadows. It started as a soft hum before growing into a full melody that vibrated against the concrete walls. Keanu stopped mid-stride. The voice carried something raw, almost fragile, yet powerful enough to pierce straight through the noise of the passing cars above. It sounded like grief. It sounded like confession. It sounded like a life unraveling and trying desperately to stitch itself back together through song. Keanu turned slowly toward the source. He moved beneath the underpass where a faint glow from a flickering street lamp revealed a man sitting beside a rusted shopping cart, overflowing with clothes, blankets, and a few treasured belongings. The man appeared to be in his late 40s, African-American, with deep lines around his eyes and a short beard that had grown uneven from weeks of hardship. His jacket was worn thin, and the guitar in his hands was cracked along the edge as if it had weathered every storm the man had endured. Yet, when he sang, his voice did not falter. Keanu remained still, letting the sound wash over him. This was no ordinary street performance. The man wasn't playing for money or attention. He was playing as if the music was holding him together, note by note. His voice carried truths that most people never speak aloud: hurt, faith, hope, survival. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. He had spent years around world-class musicians, but this voice made him forget the cold, forget the world outside the underpass, forget even his own grief for a moment. It was the kind of sound that made a person stop walking and listen. This was the moment everything began. The man's fingers moved slowly over the strings, each stroke deliberate, almost tender, as if he feared the guitar might crumble if handled too roughly. His song rose and fell with a kind of weary grace, shaped by years of carrying stories no one had asked to hear. Under the dim street lamp, his eyes remained half-closed, lost in rhythm, lost in memory. Keanu stepped closer with silent caution, not wanting to interrupt something that felt sacred. His breath formed small clouds in the cool air as he listened, the sound resonating through the hollow space like a confession offered to the night itself. The lyrics drifted out with aching clarity. They spoke of days spent wandering, of nights searching for a place to sleep, of people who passed by without seeing him. They spoke of a mother he loved, a dream he once had, and the sharp sting of losing everything except his voice. There was no bitterness in the music, only worn-down honesty. It struck Keanu in a way he hadn't expected. He had always been attuned to emotion expressed quietly rather than loudly, and this man's voice felt like a mirror held up to the most vulnerable parts of the human soul. Keanu took another step until he was close enough for the singer to notice him. The man's fingers faltered for half a second, startled by the presence in front of him, but he didn't stop playing. He lifted his gaze, revealing dark eyes lined with exhaustion, yet holding a faint spark that hadn't been extinguished by hardship. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft echo of the guitar strings. Keanu offered a small nod of respect. It wasn't the nod of a celebrity recognizing a street musician. It was the nod of one human recognizing another who had bared his heart without hesitation. The singer continued, emboldened by the silent acknowledgement. His voice grew stronger, filling the underpass with a haunting warmth that made passing pedestrians slow down, glance over, and then drift away as if unsure what they were witnessing. The world moved on, but Keanu remained planted in place. When the final note lingered into quiet, the man lowered his hands and let them rest on the battered guitar. His breath trembled, as though the song had taken the last of his strength. Keanu stepped forward with gentle steps, his expression softened by something deeper than admiration. He wasn't thinking about fame or opportunity, or the fact that he was Keanu Reeves recognized across the world. He was thinking of a voice that carried too many truths to ignore. "That was beautiful," Keanu said softly. His voice echoed faintly in the cold air, sincere and unmistakably moved. The man blinked, unsure if the compliment was real or imagined. Compliments were not something he heard often anymore. He nodded shyly, as if afraid to accept praise he didn't believe he deserved. Keanu's gaze moved to the cracked guitar, then back to the man's weary face. The question formed naturally, shaped by the moment and the emotion still vibrating in the air. "What's your name?" The man hesitated, as if uncertain whether his name held any meaning left in the world. Then he answered quietly, Elijah Cross." Keanu repeated the name under his breath, almost reverently, as if committing it to memory. He didn't know why yet, but something inside him told him that meeting Elijah Cross was not an accident. It was the beginning of something neither of them could foresee. Elijah shifted uncomfortably, as if saying his own name reminded him of everything he had lost along the way. The wind pressed through the underpass, rustling the edges of the thin blanket wrapped around his belongings. Keanu took in every detail, the frayed jacket sleeves, the careful way Elijah held the guitar, the quiet humility in his posture. None of it matched the voice Keanu had just heard. That voice belonged on a stage, not beneath a bridge where the world hurried past without listening. For a moment, neither man spoke. The city above them churned with noise, but down here the air felt suspended, almost waiting. Keanu sensed the heaviness behind Elijah's silence. He knew that silence. It was the kind born from being overlooked for too long. "You've got a gift," Keanu finally said, his tone steady. "A rare one." Elijah looked away, as if the compliment weighed too much. "Used to think so," he murmured. "Life had other plans." Keanu stepped closer, just enough to bridge the space between them. He didn't press. He didn't ask for a story Elijah wasn't ready to tell. He simply listened to the quiet, giving Elijah room to breathe. Under the dim street lamp, Elijah's eyes lifted again, meeting Keanu's with a flicker of vulnerability and disbelief. Why would someone like him stop? Why would someone like Keanu care? Keanu exhaled slowly. "Elijah, I heard something tonight I wasn't supposed to walk past, and that was the moment everything truly began." Keanu stayed where he was, close enough to show interest, but far enough not to invade Elijah's space. The underpass felt colder now, maybe because the song had ended and the silence felt heavier without it. Elijah's hands rested lightly on his guitar as if he wasn't sure whether he was allowed to hold it with pride anymore. Keanu sensed the hesitation and approached with slow, measured steps. He didn't want to interrupt the fragile calm that had settled between them. "You've been out here a long time," Keanu asked gently. Elijah nodded once, his eyes drifting to the cracked concrete beneath him. Long enough to forget what normal feels like. His voice carried no bitterness, only a kind of tired acceptance. He shifted on the cardboard beneath him and offered a faint, polite smile. "Apologies if my singing disturbed you, sir. I try to keep it low after dark." "It didn't disturb me," Keanu said softly. "It stopped me." Elijah's eyebrows lifted in mild surprise. People didn't usually stop for him. They stepped around him, or past him, or through him as if he were made of smoke. Having someone listen, truly listen, caught him off guard. He cleared his throat and adjusted the guitar on his lap almost protectively. Keanu sat down beside him on the cold ground without hesitation. Elijah tensed at first, not used to anyone choosing to sit near him, let alone someone dressed neatly and speaking kindly. The city hummed overhead as the two men sat in the dim glow of the underpass. Keanu waited patiently, giving Elijah time to believe the moment was real. After a long pause, Elijah finally spoke. "My name's Elijah Cross," he said quietly. "I used to sing in church when I was a kid. Used to think music was going to be my whole life." "What happened?" Keanu asked gently. Elijah let out a slow breath. "Life happened." He kept his eyes on the guitar. "Lost my mama a few years back. She was my anchor. After she passed, I didn't handle it right. Fell into a depression I couldn't claw my way out of." He tapped the wood of the guitar lightly, stopped singing for a while. "Lost my job after an accident messed up my back. 1 month turned into 3, then rent piled up, and next thing I knew, everything I owned fit in that cart." Keanu listened quietly. He didn't offer forced reassurances or cliches. He knew enough about life to understand that sometimes the world collapsed slowly, quietly, piece by piece. Elijah's voice didn't shake when he spoke. If anything, it carried a calm, shaped by surviving what many would not. Elijah lifted the guitar again, but hesitated before playing. "Funny thing is," he said, "music was the last thing I had left, and it's the only thing that kept me from giving up completely." Keanu leaned slightly closer. "Can I hear another one?" Elijah looked at him, startled by the request. "Another song? Right now, if you're willing," Keanu said, his tone warm and sincere. Elijah hesitated for a long moment. Shame flickered across his face, the kind carried by a man who once had dreams, but no longer believed he had the right to show them. But Keanu's expression held no judgment, only curiosity, only respect. Elijah swallowed hard, adjusted his grip, and nodded slowly. "All right. I've been working on something new, wrote it a few weeks ago. It's called Walls Can Hear." Keanu's eyes softened. Something about the title already felt personal. Elijah began to play. Elijah's first chord rang out low and warm, filling the hollow space beneath the underpass with a sound that seemed to linger in the air longer than it should. His fingers moved with a quiet familiarity, as though even in the harshest seasons of life, the guitar had remained the one place his hands still knew what to do. Keanu leaned in slightly, his breath steady, his eyes fixed on Elijah's face rather than the guitar. He wanted to see what the music revealed. The melody deepened as Elijah's voice joined it. Walls Can Hear wasn't loud or theatrical. It was delicate, almost whispered at first, as if Elijah were afraid the night itself might break if he pushed too hard. But with each passing line, his voice grew stronger. The lyrics described nights spent in shelters, where the walls absorbed every whispered prayer and every fear no one dared to say out loud. They described loneliness heavy enough to echo. They described hope so thin, it sometimes felt like dust slipping through fingers. Yet, beneath all of that, the song carried a fragile determination, the kind that grew out of surviving one too many nights that felt like final straws. Keanu felt something shift inside him. Elijah wasn't just talented. He wasn't just someone who could sing beautifully. He was someone whose voice carried the truth of a life most people never bothered to look at. It was rare to hear someone sing without trying to impress, without trying to be anything other than real. Keanu could feel every word settle deep in the chest, the way music used to hit him during the most difficult seasons of his own life. Elijah reached the end of the song with a soft, trembling hum. The final note faded into silence, leaving only the distant rumble of cars above them. He lowered the guitar slowly, not daring to look at Keanu right away. Performers who had lost their confidence often braced for rejection, even when no critique was coming. Keanu exhaled in disbelief. "Elijah, that was extraordinary." Elijah blinked, surprised. "You really think so?" "I don't think so," Keanu replied. "I know so." A long silence followed, not uncomfortable, but heavy with meaning. Elijah's shoulders eased, though he still looked unsure of how much he was allowed to believe. Compliments from strangers were rare for him. Compliments from someone like Keanu felt impossible. Elijah finally lifted his gaze. "I wrote that one on a night I almost didn't make it through," he confessed. "Sometimes I write just to remind myself that I'm still here." Keanu nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the admission. That song, it could reach people, Elijah. Really reach them. Elijah let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "Mr. Reeves, folks like me, don't reach anybody. I'm invisible most days. People walk right past me, even when I'm playing." He gestured faintly to the cracked concrete around them. "This is my stage now." Keanu looked around at the bleak underpass, then back at Elijah with a soft intensity. "It doesn't have to be." Elijah's eyes flickered, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Tell me something. If you had one chance, just one in front of the world, would you take it?" Elijah stared down at his guitar, his expression twisted with both hope and resignation. "Sir," he said quietly, "chances like that don't come to men like me." Keanu's voice softened, yet carried a certainty that made Elijah finally look up. "Maybe they do tonight," Keanu said. Elijah held still, as if the night itself had paused to confirm what he heard. The hum of distant traffic faded behind the sound of his own heartbeat. No one had spoken to him like that in years. No one had looked at him with anything more than passing pity or polite avoidance. But Keanu's eyes held something different. They held belief. Tonight, Elijah whispered, almost afraid to breathe the word. Keanu nodded once. "I don't make promises I can't keep, but I don't walk past a voice like yours." Elijah swallowed hard, gripping the guitar as if it were the only steady thing in his world. He searched Keanu's face for any sign of insincerity, any hint that this was some fleeting kindness with no real meaning. Instead, he saw quiet resolve. He saw sincerity without spectacle. He saw a man who meant exactly what he said. "Why me?" Elijah finally asked. Keanu answered without hesitation. "Because the world hears enough polished noise. What you sing comes from truth, and truth deserves a chance." The wind pushed softly through the underpass, lifting a corner of Elijah's blanket. He looked down, then back at Keanu with a fragile rising hope. "Then I'll take that chance," he said. For a long moment after Elijah agreed to take the chance, the two men sat quietly beneath the underpass, letting the weight of the moment settle between them. The night felt different now, as if the city itself sensed that something irreversible had begun. Keanu could see the flicker of hope in Elijah's eyes, fragile but unmistakable. Hope was something Elijah hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, and it showed in the way he kept looking away, struggling to believe that any of this was real. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen lit the space around them with a pale glow. Elijah watched with curiosity, unsure what was happening. Keanu scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for: Daniel Harper. Daniel was a longtime friend, a respected producer, known for discovering raw talent in unexpected places. He hosted a live showcase called the Ember Room Sessions, a performance series streamed to millions worldwide. It had launched the careers of dozens of artists who had once lived in obscurity. Keanu hesitated only long enough to look at Elijah. "I want you to trust me," he said softly. Elijah nodded, though his hands trembled as they rested on the guitar. He had very few people left in his life to trust, but something about Keanu's presence felt steady, grounded, real. And in this moment, trusting him felt easier than trusting himself. Keanu tapped the call button. The phone rang twice before Daniel picked up. "Keanu, it's late. Everything all right?" Daniel's voice carried through the speaker, warm but wary. "I'm fine," Keanu said, "but I found someone. Someone you need to hear." Daniel chuckled lightly. "You say that like you're calling from an alleyway with some hidden superstar waiting to be discovered." Keanu didn't laugh. "I'm under a bridge," he said calmly. "And yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." There was a small pause on the line. Daniel knew Keanu well enough to hear when he was serious. "You're not joking." "No," Keanu said. "This man's name is Elijah Cross. He has a voice you can't walk past." Elijah shifted awkwardly, glancing between Keanu and the phone, as if unsure whether he was meant to be part of the conversation or just the subject of it. Keanu gave him an encouraging nod. Daniel cleared his throat. "All right," he said. "Let me hear a verse. Just a verse." "If it's as good as you say, we'll talk." Keanu extended the phone toward Elijah. Elijah stared at it for a long moment, disbelief widening his eyes. "Sing," he whispered. "Just be yourself," Keanu assured him. "That's enough." Elijah lifted the guitar fingertips, finding the strings with a practiced familiarity he didn't have to think about. The first chord vibrated gently through the cold air. Elijah took a breath, then began singing the opening lines of Walls Can Hear. His voice carried through the phone with surprising clarity, the melody floating upward and resonating in the hollow space above them. Keanu watched Elijah closely, saw the moment his expression shifted from fear to something deeper, something freer. Elijah wasn't singing for a producer. He wasn't singing for a chance. He was singing because it was the one thing that still felt like a piece of his humanity. When he finished the verse, silence filled the line. A long silence. Then Daniel spoke. His tone completely changed. "Keanu, bring him to me." Elijah lowered the guitar slowly, his hand still trembling from the intensity of the moment. He waited for Keanu to interpret Daniel's response, unsure whether the silence he'd heard was good or bad. His expression wavered between hope and fear, the two emotions warring in his eyes like they had for years. Keanu ended the call and looked at Elijah with a warm, almost relieved smile. "He wants to meet you," he said. "He wants you in the Ember Room sessions." Elijah's mouth fell open slightly. "Me? On that show? That's impossible." He looked down as if afraid to accept the thought. "People like me don't get invitations to places like that." Keanu gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tonight, they do." Elijah's breath hitched. He stared at Keanu, searching for anything that might reveal this was some kind of misunderstanding, but there was nothing except sincerity, steady and unshaken. "I don't know what to say," Elijah whispered. "This feels like a dream." Keanu shook his head softly. "No, this is real, and you deserve it." The wind swept through the underpass, carrying with it the faint sounds of traffic and far-off voices. Elijah looked around, taking in the bleak surroundings he'd grown familiar with. The cracked pavement, the graffiti-covered walls, the cold concrete pillars. It felt surreal that a place that had witnessed so much of his suffering had now become the setting for a moment that might change everything. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded scarf. It was soft, thick, and warm, the kind of scarf made to protect someone from winter's bite. He held it out to Elijah. "Take this," Keanu said. "It's colder tonight than it looks." Elijah stared at the scarf as though it were something rare and precious. "I can't take that from you." "You're not taking anything," Keanu replied gently. "I'm giving it to you." Elijah touched the scarf cautiously, almost reverently. He lifted it with trembling hands and wrapped it around his neck. The warmth enveloped him immediately, and he exhaled a shaky breath. It wasn't just the fabric. It was the feeling of being cared for, something he hadn't felt in far too long. His throat tightened, and he blinked rapidly, fighting the sting in his eyes. Keanu noticed. "Elijah," he said softly, "you don't have to hold everything in." Elijah shook his head, but the tears gathered anyway. He wiped at them with the back of his hand, embarrassed. "Sorry," he muttered. "I'm just not used to kindness." "You deserve kindness," Keanu said. "Everyone does." The words seemed to unravel something inside Elijah. His breathing grew uneven, and he leaned forward, pressing a hand to his brow. For years he had carried himself through the world as quietly as possible, trying not to be a burden, trying not to hope for too much because disappointment had taught him how sharp it could cut. But tonight was different. Tonight someone had seen him. Someone had cared. Keanu's voice broke gently into the moment. "Let me take you somewhere warm. You shouldn't stay out here tonight." Elijah hesitated, torn between gratitude and fear. "Where would I even go? A hotel?" Keanu said simply. "I'll take care of it." Elijah's eyes widened. "A hotel? Sir, that's too much." "It's not," Keanu assured him. "It's the least I can do." The night air felt colder now, as if emphasizing how much Elijah needed this small act of shelter. He swallowed hard and nodded slowly, unable to speak, around the emotion filling his chest. Keanu stood offering a hand to help Elijah up. Elijah took it, and for the first time in years, he stood with something more than exhaustion in his bones. He stood with possibility. They walked out from under the underpass together, Elijah pushing his cart with one hand and clutching the scarf with the other. The city lights ahead glowed like distant promises he never thought he would be allowed to touch again. A cold breeze swept past, but for the first time in a long time, Elijah didn't shiver. The warmth around his neck reminded him he wasn't alone tonight. Keanu guided him toward the street where his driver waited. Elijah paused before getting in, suddenly overwhelmed. "Mr. Reeves," he said quietly, "I don't understand why you're doing this. You don't even know me." Keanu met his eyes with calm sincerity. "I know your voice," he said. "I know the truth in it, and that's enough." Elijah's throat tightened again. He felt the weight of every night he had slept on cold sidewalks. Every morning he had woken with nothing but determination to survive one more day. Now someone who could have walked past him without a second glance had stopped, listened, and cared. The contrast felt almost too large to grasp. Inside the warm hotel lobby, the lights were soft and golden. Elijah froze at the entrance, suddenly aware of his worn shoes and weathered clothes. But Keanu placed a reassuring hand on his back and gently nudged him forward. The staff greeted them without judgment, and Keanu arranged the room quietly, not drawing attention to himself. When Elijah received the keycard, his hands shook so much he nearly dropped it. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Keanu shook his head. "Elijah, everyone deserves to be heard, and everyone deserves a safe night's rest." Elijah closed his eyes, tears finally falling. For the first time in years, he felt seen. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin hotel curtains, painting soft streaks of gold across the room. Elijah opened his eyes slowly, unsure for a moment where he was. The sheets beneath him were clean. The mattress was warm. The air smelled faintly of laundry detergent instead of concrete dust and exhaust fumes. He blinked, sat up, and pressed both hands against the blanket, as if testing whether the comfort was real. A subtle ache pulled at his chest when he realized it wasn't a dream. For the first time in years, he had slept without fear of being woken by cold noise or danger. He breathed deeply, letting gratitude flood through him like warmth spreading through chilled limbs. His eyes stung with the memory of Keanu's words from the night before. "Everyone deserves to be heard." Elijah repeated the phrase quietly, almost reverently. It was strange how a single sentence could feel like a key unlocking something he had kept locked away for far too long. He stood and walked toward the bathroom mirror. The reflection staring back didn't look like someone preparing for the world's attention. His beard was uneven, his hair overgrown, his eyes tired despite the long sleep. The man in the mirror looked like someone who had lived too many hard seasons and carried the marks of every one. Elijah touched the glass lightly, unsure if he could become the man Keanu seemed to believe he was. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, the world was already stirring with curiosity. A hotel staff member, unaware of the magnitude of their action, had posted a picture to social media earlier that morning. The image showed Keanu Reeves standing beside Elijah the night before the city lights behind them, and the cracked guitar visible at Elijah's side. The caption was innocent, nothing more than a simple note observing Keanu helping someone in need. But the internet did what it always did: magnified, questioned, speculated. By sunrise, millions of people were sharing the photo. Questions rippled across social media platforms. Who is Elijah Cross? Why is Keanu helping a homeless singer under a bridge? Did Keanu discover someone new? Was this part of a film or something real? Reports began circulating, each more curious than the last. Entertainment blogs reached out for comments. News pages tried to find answers. Some people assumed Elijah must already be famous. Others assumed he must have saved Keanu's life. The theories were endless, each more inaccurate than the last. Keanu, however, remained silent. He turned down every request for comment, every invitation to speak on morning shows, every inquiry from reporters. He didn't correct the rumors, didn't respond to the noise, didn't claim credit for anything. His silence became louder than the speculation. It was his way of drawing a boundary the world didn't always respect. But for Elijah, completely unaware of the chaos online, the silence inside the hotel room was peaceful until his phone rang. He nearly jumped. His hands shook as he answered, expecting perhaps a hotel manager or a mistaken call. Instead, he heard Keanu's calm voice. "Elijah, I'm downstairs. I brought some things for you." Elijah swallowed hard. "You really came back," he whispered. "Of course," Keanu replied gently. "I said we'd do this together." Elijah stared at the door, the reality of the day beginning to settle like weight in his chest. The world might know his name now, but he wasn't sure he was ready. Elijah opened the door slowly, unsure of what. He looked more nervous about seeing Keanu again, after last night's emotional unraveling or facing whatever came next. But when Keanu stepped into the hallway, carrying a simple paper bag and a guitar case, Elijah's tension eased. There was nothing intimidating about him. No entourage, no cameras. Just Keanu, calm and steady as ever. "I brought you some clothes," Keanu said with a small smile. "Thought you might like something comfortable for today." Elijah stared at the bag as though it were made of gold. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Keanu replied. "Let's just take it one step at a time." They entered the room and Keanu set the items gently on the bed. Elijah approached them cautiously, almost afraid to touch anything. Inside the bag were jeans, a plain black t-shirt, socks, and a warm jacket. Everything simple, nothing flashy, yet to Elijah it felt extraordinary. These weren't just clothes, they were dignity, a chance to show the world a version of himself he had thought he'd lost. Keanu noticed the hesitation. "If the sizes are off, we'll fix it." "No," Elijah said quickly. "They're perfect." But the item that drew Elijah's breath away was the guitar case. It was clean, polished, and familiar in a way that tugged at his heart. Keanu opened it slowly, revealing Elijah's own guitar, the same battered, cracked instrument that had carried him through some of his darkest nights. Except now it didn't look lost or broken anymore. The wood was repaired, the cracks filled, the strings replaced. It wasn't a new guitar, it was the same one brought back to life. Elijah's knees weakened as he stepped closer. You fixed it." "I had a friend look at it this morning," Keanu said. "I didn't want to replace it. It's part of your story." Elijah reached out and touched the wood, his fingers trembling. Memories surged, nights of loneliness, mornings of resilience, songs written in desperation. This guitar had been the only constant when everything else fell apart. Seeing it restored felt like seeing a piece of himself restored too. He didn't try to hide his tears. He let them fall freely as he held the guitar to his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't deserve any of this." Keanu shook his head gently. "Elijah, you deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard." Elijah inhaled shakily. "I don't know if I can handle being heard by anyone beyond that bridge." Keanu sat on the edge of the bed, his expression thoughtful. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "The Ember Room showcase is in 5 days." Elijah froze. 5 days? Keanu nodded. "It's sooner than I expected, but you'll be ready." Elijah took a stumbling step backward. "Mr. Reeves, I haven't performed for an audience in years. I can't get on a stage. I can barely sing if someone looks at me too closely." Keanu remained calm. "You can do this, and I'll help you prepare every step of the way." Elijah gripped the guitar, trying to steady his breath. "This feels too big, like the world is suddenly watching." Keanu held his gaze. "They're watching because you have something real to say." Elijah felt the words settle inside him, heavy with truth and possibility. But possibility was terrifying. Elijah sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the restored guitar still in his hands, as if afraid it would vanish if he loosened his grip. 5 days. The words echoed in his mind with a weight he hadn't felt in years. The Ember Room sessions wasn't just a stage. It was a global spotlight. Millions of people would be watching, people who didn't know him, people who might judge him before he even strummed a chord. "I don't know if I can survive something like that," Elijah said quietly. "What if I mess up? What if the crowd laughs? What if I freeze?" His voice cracked under the pressure of fears he had carried silently for far too long. Keanu moved closer, pulling a chair in front of Elijah so they were eye to eye. "Elijah, fear doesn't mean you're not ready. It means the moment matters. You're not doing this alone. I'll be there." Every rehearsal, every step, every breath leading up to that stage. Elijah shook his head. "Why do you believe in me this much?" Keanu took a measured breath. "Because your voice carries something I haven't heard in a very long time. Something honest. Something that can heal the people who listen to it. The world needs that more than ever." Elijah looked down, overwhelmed. "The world needs a lot of things," he murmured. "I'm not sure one broken man with a guitar can give it anything." Keanu leaned forward. "You're not giving the world perfection. You're giving it truth. And truth is more powerful than perfection." The words hung in the quiet room, settling like warm light on cold ground. Elijah's breathing steadied, though uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. He traced the repaired edge of the guitar, the smoothness of the restored wood, reminding him that broken things could be healed, not discarded. Keanu stood and extended a hand. "Let's get breakfast. Then we'll talk about how to prepare." Elijah hesitated before taking the hand, rising slowly, as if relearning how to stand with hope instead of resignation. As they walked toward the door, Elijah cast one last glance at the hotel room, the bed he'd slept in, the clothes folded neatly on the chair, the repaired guitar resting against his heart. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man waiting for life to pass him by. He felt like someone walking toward something real, something terrifying, something worth trying for. Elijah stepped into Keanu's private rehearsal studio with the same hesitation a man might have when entering a sacred place. The room was warm, softly lit, and lined with instruments from every stage of Keanu's life. Guitars, keyboards, percussion pieces, even an upright piano marked with scratches and signatures from old friends. It felt like walking into someone's memories. Elijah paused at the doorway, unsure if he belonged among objects that had seen better days, brighter moments, and musicians who weren't broken in the ways he was. "You're safe here," Keanu said gently as the door clicked shut behind them. "This room has carried a lot of stories. Yours can be one of them." Elijah nodded, though his hands trembled slightly as he set his restored guitar on a stand. He tried to steady his breath, but the silence of the studio felt heavier than the streets he'd slept on. At least outside, no one expected anything from him. Here, hope sat in the air, like an audience already waiting. Keanu moved to adjust a simple wooden stool in the center of the room. "Start wherever you feel comfortable. Even a whisper is okay." Elijah swallowed, sitting slowly. His throat felt tight, but his fingers found the strings instinctively. He strummed once, twice, letting the familiar vibrations settle into his bones. He hadn't played in a quiet room in years. He had forgotten how deeply the sound could travel when it wasn't battling traffic or wind or people averting their eyes. The first note of his song cracked. Elijah winced. "That's all right," Keanu said immediately. "Let it happen. Don't fight it." Elijah took another breath and tried again. This time the note held shaky but real. He moved into the verse of a song he hadn't finished one. He used to hum to himself on the coldest nights to remind himself he hadn't disappeared completely. His voice wavered, shrank, then grew slightly stronger. Keanu didn't interrupt or correct him. He simply listened with the same intensity he had shown under the underpass, as if Elijah were the only thing happening in the world. When the song ended, Elijah stared at the floor. "I'm rusty," he whispered. "I sound like someone trying to pick up pieces that don't fit anymore." Keanu took a slow step toward him. "Elijah, your voice doesn't need to be polished. It needs to be honest. Don't chase perfection. Tell the story like it mattered to you." Elijah blinked, caught off guard. "It does matter. Every line I ever wrote came from something real." "Good," Keanu said, pulling up a chair beside him. "Then sing it like you're talking to the world for the first time." Something shifted in Elijah's chest, a small but unmistakable spark. He lifted the guitar again. This time, when he sang, he closed his eyes and let the memories guide him instead of fear. He remembered his mother leaning over a church pew, whispering, "Sing from where it hurts." He remembered the first time he played on a street corner after losing his apartment, how strangers walked past him without knowing the lyrics or lighting the only warmth he had left. He finished the chorus, and when he opened his eyes, Keanu was nodding slowly. "There it is," Keanu said. "That's the voice the world needs to hear." For the first time in years, Elijah felt a sliver of belief crack through the layers of doubt he'd been living under. Not confidence, not yet something gentler. Possibility. Elijah took a moment to steady himself, letting the last vibration of the guitar fade into the warm air of the studio. His breath still shook at the edges, but he no longer felt like he was collapsing inward. Something inside him had opened, even if only a little. Keanu noticed the change and quietly dimmed the overhead lights, leaving the soft glow of the corner lamps to create a calmer atmosphere. Elijah exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he said, almost to himself, "for making this feel like a place where I can try." "You're not trying," Keanu replied. "You're remembering." Elijah held the guitar close, his fingers brushing the smooth wood that had been lovingly repaired. "I didn't think I'd ever sing in a place like this again. I didn't think I'd sing anywhere except under a bridge." Keanu settled onto the floor nearby, leaning against a soundproof panel, as if ready to stay there for as long as Elijah needed. Pain can make people hide the parts of themselves that used to shine, but sometimes the right room can bring the light back. Elijah looked around, noticing framed album covers from musicians he admired and handwritten lyrics pinned to corkboards. At the far end of the studio, a large window overlooked the city. It reminded him of all the small windows he had stared through over the years: church basements, borrowed apartments, shelters where he slept on thin mats. Each one had shown him a world that kept moving while he remained stuck in place. He cleared his throat. "There's a song I haven't finished," he said quietly. "I wrote it the night before my mother's birthday. I was sleeping behind a grocery store, and I didn't want the day to pass without singing something she could hear." "Let's hear it," Keanu said. Elijah nodded. He shifted on the stool, feeling the weight of the moment. Then he began whisper soft at first, letting the melody rise from somewhere deep in his memory. The lyrics painted a picture of a woman who scraped miracles out of nothing, who held her child's face during storms, and whispered that his voice was a calling, not a hobby. The song was unfinished, the bridge missing, but the emotion was whole. When he finished, the silence in the studio felt profound. Keanu's voice was low. "Elijah, that song, it isn't just music, it's a message. It's raw, and it's brave." Elijah lowered his head, overwhelmed. "I never got to sing it for her. She passed before I came home. I wanted to record something for her, but then life fell apart so fast I couldn't hold anything together." Keanu pushed himself up from the floor and gently rested a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Pain doesn't erase truth. Your voice still carries what she gave you." Elijah wiped his eyes. I'm scared, Keanu. I'm scared I'll let everyone down. The studio, the showcase, you. You won't, Keanu said without hesitation. And even if you stumble, even if you freeze or tremble or forget a line, that won't be failure. Failure is giving up before the world hears what you've been holding inside. Elijah breathed in deeply, letting the words settle. What happens now? He asked softly. Keanu smiled. Now you grow stronger. A moment later, there was a soft knock on the studio door. Keanu walked over and opened it to reveal a woman in her early 40s with warm eyes and a reassuring presence. Her name was Maren Doyle, a trusted friend and vocal coach who specialized in helping performers who suffered from anxiety trauma and stage fright. Elijah straightened, startled. She's here for me. Only if you're ready, Keanu said. No pressure, no rush. Elijah looked from Keanu to Maren, then back again. Something in his chest steadied. I'm ready, he said. And for the first time in years, he meant it. Maren stepped into the studio with a calm energy that filled the room without overpowering it. She approached Elijah with a gentle smile. I've heard a little about you, she said. Keanu tells me your voice carries truth. My job is to help you carry it without fear. Elijah shifted nervously, but her tone eased some of the pressure building inside him. She guided him through slow breathing exercises meant to settle the trembling in his chest. At first, Elijah struggled. His breaths were uneven, his shoulders tight. But Maren remained patient, encouraging him to let his body remember safety. When he finally sang the first note under her guidance, it came out steadier than he expected. Not perfect, but grounded. Maren nodded approvingly. There you are, she said. That's the man the world will hear. Elijah lowered his gaze, moved by how quickly she understood him. Do you really think I can stand on that stage? I know you can, she answered, because you've already survived things far harder than singing. Keanu stepped beside him, offering quiet support. Elijah looked between them and felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt hope taking shape. The night before the Ember Room sessions arrived with a heavy stillness, the kind that settles over a city right before something important shifts. Elijah sat alone in his hotel room, staring at the soft yellow light above the bed, trying to slow down the storm inside him. His guitar rested on the chair beside him, polished, restored, waiting. But Elijah couldn't bring himself to touch it. His rehearsal with Maren earlier that day had gone well, almost too well, and that success made him uneasy. He had walked out of the studio with a rare sense of confidence, but somewhere between the elevator ride and the silence of his room, that confidence had cracked. Now doubt poured through every opening. What if he forgot the lyrics? What if the world didn't hear what Keanu heard? What if they only saw a homeless man pretending to be something he wasn't? He curled forward, elbows on his knees, pressing his palms against his forehead. The noise in his mind grew louder with each breath. Keanu knocked softly a moment later before stepping inside. He carried 2 steaming cups of tea, noticing immediately the tension in Elijah's shoulders. Long day, Keanu said quietly, offering him one of the cups. Elijah didn't reach for it. His hands were trembling. Keanu sat beside him without pushing. Talk to me, he said. Elijah swallowed hard. I don't think I can do this. Keanu didn't react with surprise or disappointment. He simply waited, letting Elijah find his words. It's too much, Elijah whispered. People online, they're talking about me. They're asking who I am, where I came from, whether I deserve this chance. I'm seeing comments from people saying it's all fake, that I'm some publicity stunt. I shouldn't look at it, but I did. And now I can't stop thinking that maybe they're right. Keanu leaned forward. Elijah, look at me. It took Elijah a moment to lift his head. You're not a stunt, Keanu said. You're a man who has survived more than most people could imagine. You have a voice that carries truth. That's why the world is talking. Elijah shook his head, tears starting to form. No, they're talking because you're Keanu Reeves. They're talking because you're helping me. If it were just me standing under that bridge singing, no one would care. Keanu paused, letting that land before answering. Maybe I helped bring attention, but attention doesn't make someone a singer. You earned that. You filled that room with your voice. You moved people. That wasn't me." Elijah covered his face with his hands. His breath hitched. I'm scared. I'm scared of standing there and failing in front of millions of people. I've spent years trying to disappear so no one would see me. Now I'm supposed to walk on a stage and ask the world to look at me. I don't know how to do that." Keanu placed a gentle hand on Elijah's back. "Fear doesn't mean you're not ready. It means what you're about to do matters." Elijah let the tears fall, unable to hold them back anymore. "I don't feel worthy, Keanu. Not of this chance, not of the kindness, not of the way people are suddenly looking at me." Keanu's voice softened even more. "Worthiness isn't given by strangers. It's built from the battles you've survived. And Elijah, you've survived a war the world never saw." Elijah tried to steady his breathing, but every inhale felt thin, fragile, as though his ribs had forgotten how to expand. The pressure of the showcase pressed against him from every direction. He lifted his eyes to Keanu again, searching for something solid to hold on to. "People are going to judge me the moment I walk on that stage," Elijah said. "They're going to see a man who lived on the street. They're going to see my old scars, my worn shoes, the years of failure written all over me. They won't hear the music. They'll hear the mistakes I've made." Keanu shook his head. "Elijah, people don't connect with perfection. They connect with truth. And you have truth in your voice that most performers spend their entire lives trying to find. But what if the truth isn't enough?" Elijah whispered. Keanu took a slow breath before answering. "When my sister Kim was fighting leukemia, I spent years feeling helpless. I watched her lose her strength, then rebuild it, only to lose it again. There were days she couldn't move, and days she sang even when she could barely stand. She didn't sing to be perfect. She sang because it kept her alive. And every time she sang, every whisper of sound from her, people felt it." Elijah listened, surprised by the depth of emotion in Keanu's voice. "She taught me something," Keanu continued. "She taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. Vulnerability is courage. Anyone can pretend to be strong, but telling the world who you really are, that takes more strength than most people ever find." Elijah wiped his face with the back of his hand, trying to absorb the weight of the words. "I see that same strength in you," Keanu went on. "Every time you open your mouth to sing, you're telling the world, this is what I lived through, this is what tried to break me, and I'm still here." That is what people will hear, not the scars, not the past. They'll hear the fight inside the voice. The room fell quiet for a moment. Elijah felt his breathing slow, just a little. The panic that had been clawing at him eased its grip enough for him to focus on Keanu's presence, grounding and steady. Elijah spoke again, his voice softer. "When I was sleeping under the bridge, I used to imagine performing again. I'd close my eyes and picture a crowd, but the second I opened my eyes and saw the concrete, the trash bags, the noise, I told myself that it wasn't for me anymore, that music belonged to another version of me, someone who hadn't lost everything." Keanu leaned back slightly, giving Elijah space, but staying close enough that his support was undeniable. "Maybe you didn't lose everything," he said. "Maybe you carried the most important part with you the whole time. You didn't stop singing, Elijah, even when no one was listening." Elijah looked down, his fingers gripping the edge of the mattress. "I kept singing because if I stopped, I felt like I'd disappear. And now Keanu said singing is what's bringing you back." Elijah blinked at that. The idea felt new, almost unbelievable. Keanu reached for Elijah's guitar and placed it gently beside him. "Tomorrow isn't about proving you're perfect. It's about showing you're real. Let the world see that. Let them hear what pain turned you into. Let them hear what hope rebuilt." Elijah let out a trembling breath, the air finally reaching deeper in his lungs. For a moment, doubt loosened its grip. "Keanu," he whispered, "can I ask something? Anything. If I walk on that stage tomorrow, will you be there?" "Not in the audience, not somewhere out front, but close, backstage. Just close enough that if I fall apart, I know someone will catch me." Keanu didn't hesitate for even a breath. "I'll be right there." And for the first time that night, Elijah felt a small, fragile thread of courage beginning to form. The room fell quiet again, but this silence felt different. It wasn't the hollow, trembling kind that had filled Elijah's chest earlier. This one carried warmth shaped by the promise Keanu had just made. Elijah let out a long breath, the first steady one of the night, and lowered his gaze to his hands. They were still shaking, but not as violently as before. "Backstage is enough," Elijah said softly. "I don't need you holding my hand. I just need to know I'm not walking into that room alone." "You won't be," Keanu replied. "Not tomorrow. Not ever again if you don't want to." Elijah's throat tightened at that. No one had said those words to him in years, not since his mother passed, not since life had started taking more than it gave. He wiped his face again, but this time the tears weren't born from fear. They were from relief. Keanu rose and placed the guitar gently in Elijah's lap. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow you don't perform for approval. You perform because your story deserves a voice." Elijah held the instrument close, nodding slowly. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll stand there. I'll try." And for the first time all day, he believed he might succeed. The Ember Room had never felt so alive. On most nights, it was already one of Los Angeles's most intimate and competitive showcases, a hidden gem where rising artists fought for the attention of industry gatekeepers. But tonight, the energy in the air was different. It buzzed with an electricity that made the walls vibrate, and the audience lean forward in their seats long before the first performer even stepped on stage. Word had spread throughout the city that a secret final performer would close the night, and the only clue was a rumor whispered by a staff member overheard by a journalist posted on social media that Keanu Reeves himself might be taking the stage. By 7:30, the venue was at capacity. Industry executives squeezed into booths beside independent filmmakers and streaming platform scouts. Journalists checked their cameras and phones, hoping to be the first to capture a story. Even a few celebrities had slipped into the back rows, curious about the last-minute addition that supposedly no one had been allowed to rehearse or preview. Backstage, far removed from the applause and speculation, Elijah Cross waited with his guitar case clutched tightly in both hands. His palms were damp, his heart pounding so loudly he wondered if anyone else could hear it. He had barely slept, and though he had rehearsed every line of his song, his mind felt scattered, as if pieces of himself were trying to run in different directions. Keanu arrived quietly, unnoticed by the staff, who were rushing to prepare for the first performer. He wore simple dark clothing blending into the shadows as much as his recognizable face allowed. When he reached Elijah, he placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You made it," Keanu said softly. Elijah nodded, swallowing hard. "Barely." Keanu offered a small smile. "Barely still counts." He led Elijah down a narrow hallway, away from the bustle. They stopped near a service door that opened into a dimly lit alley. It was quiet here, the sounds of the crowd muted by concrete. Keanu had chosen this route deliberately to avoid cameras and questions. The fewer people who saw Elijah before the performance, the better. He wanted Elijah to walk on stage without expectations hanging over him like chains. Elijah took a shaky breath. "They're all out there waiting. Important people. People who can change someone's life in a minute." "Maybe," Keanu replied, "but they're just people. And tonight they're here to listen." Elijah's grip on the guitar tightened. "I'm scared they won't like what they hear." Keanu stepped closer. "You're not proving yourself. You're sharing yourself. There's a big difference." He paused, letting the words settle. "The world isn't waiting for perfection tonight. They're waiting for honesty. And you have that." Elijah looked down at his feet. His shoes weren't new or expensive, but they were clean, something he hadn't been able to say for years. He felt the weight of memory in every thread of his clothing, every inch of his restored guitar. All of it reminded him of how far he had come in just days, and how far he could fall in one moment if he failed. Keanu lifted Elijah's chin gently. "Hey," he said, "look at me." Elijah did. Keanu's expression was calm, steady, the kind of reassurance someone could lean on. "You walk out there and you give them the truth. That's all you owe anyone." Elijah closed his eyes briefly and let the words ground him. When he opened them again, his breathing had steadied, not fully but enough. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Keanu nodded. "Good. Stay close. I'll be right backstage when it's time." Together, they slipped back inside unseen. The Ember Room had no idea the storm of emotion walking toward it. The Ember Room lights dimmed as the first performer stepped on stage, a young singer-songwriter with a polished presence and a smooth, radio-ready voice. The crowd responded warmly, offering polite cheers and scattered applause. But beneath the polite enthusiasm ran a restless undercurrent. People weren't here for the early acts, not tonight. They were waiting for the unknown name on the show order. The one labeled simply as "Special Guest" brought by Keanu Reeves. Even the staff felt the tension. Bartenders leaned closer to the monitors to catch glimpses of backstage. Sound engineers whispered guesses between adjusting levels. It wasn't often that Keanu personally sponsored a performer, and even rarer, that he refused to say a single word about them. Backstage, Elijah sat on a folding chair, tuning his guitar for the 5th time, even though it had been perfectly in tune from the beginning. His leg bounced uncontrollably. His fingers kept slipping on the strings, not because they were sweaty. It was something deeper, something rooted in the old fear he had carried through years of loneliness. Keanu stayed close, watching Elijah carefully. He recognized the silent signs of panic, shallow breaths, unfocused eyes, the way Elijah's shoulders lifted toward his ears, as if bracing for impact. Keanu crouched beside him. "You're doing everything right," Keanu said, "even if it doesn't feel like it." Elijah stared ahead at the curtain separating him from the audience. He could hear muffled voices, laughter, the occasional clink of glasses. "It sounds like a forest out there," he whispered. "Dense, dark." "That's only because you can't see it from here," Keanu said. "When you step on stage, it'll be just light. Light and your voice." Elijah shook his head. "You make it sound simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy," Keanu replied, "but it's still simple." Another performer finished, and applause rippled through the room. The host walked up to the microphone, his voice booming through the speakers. "What an incredible start tonight. And we're just getting warmed up. Our next artist is a breakout from San Diego. Give it up for Jasmine Cole." The audience clapped again as the next performer took the stage. Elijah's breath caught. Time was moving too quickly. Every second felt like it was pushing him closer to something he still feared he wasn't ready for. Keanu noticed. "Want to walk for a minute?" he asked. Elijah nodded. They walked the narrow hallway behind the stage, past crates of equipment and posters from previous shows. The Ember Room had hosted countless artists whose careers began here, Grammy winners, indie darlings, musicians who now sold out arenas. Elijah's footsteps felt heavier the farther they went, as if each memory trapped in the walls added weight to his own. When they reached the far end of the hallway, Keanu stopped. "Listen," he said. Elijah listened. Footsteps on wood, a guitar harmonizing, audience murmurs rising and falling like waves. For the first time, instead of sounding like a threat, the noise felt like an invitation. "They're waiting for someone real," Keanu said. "Not someone famous, not someone flawless, someone human." Elijah's eyes softened. "Do you really believe they'll hear me that way?" "I do," Keanu answered. "And the moment you start singing, they will too." Elijah exhaled, the tension loosening slightly from his shoulders. He didn't feel brave yet, but he no longer felt entirely powerless either. Back inside the wings, the final performer before him was nearing the end of his set. The host stepped out again. "And now," he announced with growing excitement, "we move to our final act of the night. We've been asked to keep this one secret. All I can tell you is, Keanu Reeves himself brought them here." Whispers broke out instantly, cameras raised, heads turned toward the backstage curtain. Elijah froze. Keanu stepped beside him, lowering his voice. "Whatever you're feeling right now, use it. Don't fight it." Elijah nodded slowly, gripping his guitar. The world was seconds away. The murmurs beyond the curtain grew louder. Someone near the front whispered, "Is Keanu coming out?" Another voice answered. No, he said he was bringing someone. Who is it? A ripple of anticipation moved through the room like a sudden wind. Every seat leaned forward, phones lifted. The atmosphere thickened with curiosity and a kind of hopeful hunger that only comes when people sense they're moments away from witnessing something rare. Elijah's pulse hammered. The sound felt like a drum inside his chest pounding without rhythm. He tightened his grip on the guitar, terrified it might slip from his hands. But before his breath could spiral again, Keanu placed a steady hand on his shoulder. This is your moment, Keanu said softly. Not mine, not theirs, yours. Elijah swallowed, meeting his eyes. Will you stay right here until the last note, Keanu promised. The stage manager motioned for Elijah to step forward. The curtain shifted. Light from the stage spilled through the opening like a sunrise breaking into a dark room. Elijah felt the warmth of it on his face. He took one step, then another. And as he walked toward the microphone, the Ember Room went silent, waiting to hear the voice of the man Keanu Reeves believed in. The host stepped back to the microphone, the hum of curiosity already thick in the air. Our final performer tonight, he said, drawing out the moment as the room leaned in, is someone the world doesn't know, yet. He was brought here tonight by a man you all know very well. Please welcome Elijah Cross. The name meant nothing to most people in the room, and that was exactly what made everything tilt. There was no social media handle flooding screens, no record label announcement, no splashy introduction, just a name spoken into a room full of people used to being impressed in advance. Soft applause rose hesitant at first. Behind the curtain, Elijah felt his stomach twist. His fingers tightened around the neck of his guitar until his knuckles turned pale. He heard his own name echo through the speakers, and for a second it felt like someone else's. A version of him that had never slept under bridges. A version that hadn't forgotten how to dream. Keanu stood slightly behind him, just out of the audience's view. Remember, he murmured, you're not proving yourself. You're sharing yourself. Elijah gave the smallest nod he could manage. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. His heart pounded so hard, it made his throat tight. For a second, the urge to run nearly overpowered him. But then, he felt the familiar weight of the guitar against his chest, the smoothness of the repaired wood under his fingers, and he remembered nights when singing had kept him alive. The stage manager signaled. The curtain parted. Light flooded his eyes. Elijah stepped out. The Ember Room looked bigger from the stage than it had from the wings. Rows of faces under soft amber lighting, phones held loosely in hands, glasses catching reflections from the stage lights. He could see the front row, clearly agents, journalists, executives, and behind them, shadows of people whose names he would never know. Some leaned forward with interest. Others sat back, skeptical, arms crossed, already judging. His clothes were simple. Clean jeans, a plain dark shirt. The jacket Keanu had given him. He didn't look like a star. He looked like a man who had walked a long road to get here. His guitar, despite its careful restoration, still bore faint marks of its past life, the ghost of old cracks, the softened edges where years of playing had worn the finish down. Whispers began almost immediately. Is that him? That's the guy from the photo, right? The one under the bridge. He looks nervous. Keanu brought him on the far side of the stage, just behind the hanging curtain. Keanu watched with his heart in his throat. He had been on more sets and more stages than he could count, but watching Elijah step into this moment felt different. He knew what Elijah had survived to stand there. He knew what it cost him just to take those few steps. Elijah reached the microphone and stopped. His chest tightened. The crowd blurred. For an instant the room vanished, and all he could see in his mind was the cold concrete of the underpass, the nights he spent curled against his cart, the way people walked past as if he were invisible. His throat closed, his breath caught. Every trauma, every humiliation, every lonely morning crashed into him at once. He froze. Silence spread through the Ember Room like a slow wave. The audience shifted, confused. A few people exchanged glances. One person near the back stifled a laugh, thinking he had stage fright beyond repair. A journalist in the third row raised a brow, already forming a narrative in their head. Backstage, Keanu's hand tightened around the side curtain, but he didn't rush in. He had promised Elijah he would stay close, not take the moment away from him. Elijah stared at the microphone, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack his ribs. Then very slowly he closed his eyes and reached for the only thing that had never abandoned him, his song. Elijah took one long, trembling breath, then another. The noise of the room softened, fading into something distant. He let the weight of the guitar settle against him and positioned his fingers along the strings the way he had countless nights beneath the bridge when the world felt cold and too heavy to carry. He strummed the first chord. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried. Conversations stopped mid-whisper. Camera phones lowered. Elijah leaned toward the microphone. His eyes still closed, and began to sing the song that had held him together when nothing else did. Walls can hear what hearts can't say. His voice was raw, at first shaky around the edges, but honest. The kind of honesty that slipped past the armor people wore and landed deep. The Ember Room fell silent. So silent that even the soft creak of a chair shifting sounded loud. Keanu, standing in the wings, felt the air change as Elijah found his footing. With each verse, Elijah's voice strengthened. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress. He was telling the room who he was. A man who had learned to carve hope out of empty spaces. A man who had survived nights colder than anyone in that audience could imagine. When he reached the final line, he opened his eyes. For the first time, he saw the audience not as a threat, but as witnesses. People staring back with something softer than judgment, something closer to respect. He breathed once more and shifted into the second song, Mother's Window. The chords were gentler, fragile, and warm at the same time. Elijah's voice trembled again, but this time with emotion, not fear. He sang about the last moment he had with his mother, the way she looked at him through the hospital window, how her smile had carried him long after her passing. As he sang, a woman in the front row wiped her eyes. A man beside her swallowed hard, his posture straightening as if trying to hold himself together. By the time Elijah reached the final verse, the entire room felt suspended in air, held by a voice that had once belonged to a man the world walked past without seeing. Tonight they saw him, and no one made a sound. For a moment after Elijah finished his second song, the Ember Room felt weightless. The kind of silence that wasn't empty at all, but full, so full, it pressed against the walls, full of emotion, full of realization, full of people trying to swallow the lump rising in their throats. Elijah stood at the microphone, breathing softly, his fingers still curled around the neck of his guitar, unsure if he should step back or keep going. He had expected applause or confusion, or maybe polite clapping from a crowd unsure what to make of him. But he hadn't expected this kind of silence, a silence that felt like the entire room was gathering itself before letting go. And then it happened. The chat window of the live stream erupted. Lines of text blasted upward faster than moderators could read them. Who is this man? His voice is breaking me. I'm crying in my living room. I just looked him up. No social media. Where has he been hiding? This is the realest performance I've ever heard. Keanu Reeves brought him. Of course he did. What's his story? Someone find his background. He needs a record deal right now. Within minutes, Elijah Cross's name surged across platforms. The Ember Room's stream, which normally brought in a few 100,000 views, skyrocketed past 1 million, then 2 million, then more as people shared the link across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Someone clipped the moment Elijah first stepped on stage looking terrified. Another clipped the way his voice cracked with honesty when he sang Mother's Window. Those clips exploded instantly. The hashtag #ElijahCross shot upward so fast that social media dashboards couldn't keep pace. Within 15 minutes, it hit #1 in the United States. Within 20 minutes, it trended globally. Back in the audience, phones lit up. People whispered to each other, stunned, pointing at their screens as notifications rolled in from friends watching at home. Even seasoned producers in the crowd, people who had heard thousands of voices, seen the brightest stars rise and fall, looked shaken by what they had witnessed. Near the stage, Keanu remained in the wings where the lights touched only the outline of his figure. He had stayed hidden during Elijah's performance, refusing to draw attention away from the man he believed deserved the moment. But now the host approached him with a whispered request. "Would you introduce his final song?" Keanu hesitated. He didn't want this to become about him, but he also understood that sometimes a familiar face was needed to lift someone new into the light. He nodded once. The host walked to center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, before our final song tonight," he paused as murmurs rose, "we have someone very special who wants to say a few words." Gasps spread across the room as Keanu Reeves stepped into the stage lights. He didn't smile. He didn't pose. He simply lifted the microphone and turned toward Elijah. "This man's voice deserves the world's ears." The room erupted into applause, loud and overwhelming. Elijah blinked at Keanu, his eyes wide, as if still unsure that any of this was real. Keanu stepped aside, letting the moment fall back into Elijah's hands. Elijah swallowed hard as Keanu stepped back into the shadows, leaving him alone with the microphone again. The audience was still buzzing from Keanu's brief appearance, but the applause softened into a warm hush as Elijah lifted his guitar. He didn't speak. He didn't announce the song. He simply played the opening chord, letting the room settle into the sound. It wasn't a song he had ever planned to share publicly. He had written it on a night when he felt invisible, when the city lights offered no warmth, and the world felt too big to belong to. But now, standing in a room full of strangers who were no longer strangers, he felt something shift inside him, something like release. He sang a final piece, gentle, aching, hopeful. A song about choosing to stay when everything inside you says to give up. His voice trembled in places, grew stronger in others, and wrapped itself around the room like a quiet embrace. The Ember Room became still again, not from shock this time, but from reverence. When the last note faded, Elijah slowly lowered his guitar. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He simply stood there, breathing through the weight of what he had shared. His chest rose and fell with shaky effort. His eyes glistened beneath the stage lights, reflecting an emotion he hadn't dared feel in years. And then someone in the back stood. A single person. No clapping yet, just standing. Another person rose beside them, then 3 more, then a dozen, then the entire front row. Within seconds, the whole Ember Room was on its feet. The applause began like a spark, small, quick, a single pair of hands meeting once, then twice. Then it spread, gathering force, building into something thunderous. People were cheering through tears. Some held their hands to their mouths. Others lifted their phones not to film, but to remember how they felt in this exact moment. It was the longest standing ovation in the Ember Room's history. Elijah stood frozen, his breath catching. The world he had once believed had forgotten him was now rising to its feet. For him, for his voice, for his truth. His lips parted in disbelief. Tears spilled down his cheeks, falling silently. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, each one a piece of his past, finally released. Backstage, Keanu felt his own eyes sting. He had seen many performances in his life. He had witnessed careers ignite talent bloom and moments of pure artistic electricity. But nothing compared to watching Elijah Cross reclaim the part of himself that life had tried to steal. The applause went on and on, echoing across the live stream. The chat exploded again. "I've never cried from a song before. Give this man a record deal now. I'll remember this performance for the rest of my life." Keanu, thank you for helping him share his gift. Elijah Cross just changed the world tonight. For the first time in years, Elijah felt seen, and for the first time in years, he believed he deserved to be. Elijah woke before sunrise, his mind drifting somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. For a few seconds, he didn't know where he was. The sheets were too soft. The room was too quiet. The ceiling above him wasn't the one he'd stared at when lying under a bridge. It took a moment for his memory to catch up with the present. The Ember Room. The standing ovation. The voices shouting his name. The moment he realized the world had finally heard him. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and reached for his phone, an older model that barely held a charge. The screen flickered to life, immediately overwhelmed by notifications. Hundreds of text messages from unknown numbers. Thousands of social media mentions he didn't even know he had accounts for. Emails from names he'd only ever seen in headlines. He scrolled in bewilderment. A record label executive. Then another, then 6 more. A morning talk show requesting an appearance. 2 late-night shows asking if he could fly out within 48 hours. A major streaming service offering to feature him in a documentary about undiscovered talent. And then a message from a Grammy-winning producer. He read it twice to make sure he wasn't imagining it. Elijah, your voice shook me. If you want to make an album, I'll produce it for free. No contracts until you're ready. No pressure, just art. Elijah lowered the phone, overwhelmed. His chest tightened with something that wasn't fear this time, but disbelief so strong it made his hands tremble. He had dreamed of moments like this when he was young, but life had crushed those dreams so thoroughly he hadn't thought they could be revived. Yet now here they were, all at once, all demanding his attention, all expecting him to know how to navigate a world he had been shut out of for years. But he didn't know where to begin. He didn't have a home. He didn't have a bank account. He didn't even have clean clothes for an interview unless he borrowed from Keanu. As if summoned by the thought, a soft knock sounded at the door. Elijah. It's me, Keanu said from the hallway. Elijah opened the door, still clutching his phone as if it might disappear. Keanu stepped inside with a gentle, encouraging smile. He carried a paper bag that smelled like warm breakfast sandwiches and a cup tray with 2 coffees. You're up early, Keanu said. I couldn't really sleep, Elijah admitted. I figured. Keanu handed him the coffee. Today's going to be big. Elijah sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling again. I don't understand any of this. Why are so many people calling me? Why does anyone suddenly care what I have to say? Keanu sat beside him. Because they heard you, and when people hear something true, they don't forget it. Elijah exhaled shakily. But I don't know what to do next. That's okay, Keanu said. You don't have to know everything today. One step at a time. Elijah looked down at the barrage of notifications still flashing on the screen. I don't even have a place to live. I know, Keanu said gently. And we're going to take care of that first. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folder. I took the liberty of arranging something for you, he said. Nothing overwhelming, just a safe place to land. Elijah opened the folder slowly. Inside was a short-term housing agreement for a modest apartment near the Arts District. Clean, quiet, fully furnished, already paid for the next 3 months. It wasn't extravagant, it wasn't flashy, it was exactly what someone rebuilding their life needed. Elijah's breath caught. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Keanu replied. You just need a stable place to think, to breathe, to decide what comes next. Elijah set the folder down, overwhelmed again, but in a different way than the night before. I've barely started standing on my own feet. I don't want to become someone who depends on you for everything. Keanu shook his head gently. You're not depending on me. You're allowing yourself to accept a hand that's offered. There's a difference. And besides, he paused, his voice softening. Everyone needs support when life changes overnight. Elijah pressed his palms together, trying to collect himself. The messages, the offers, the praise, it all felt surreal. A week ago, people avoided making eye contact with him on the street. Now they were fighting to get his attention. What if I can't handle all of this? He whispered. What if I mess it up? Keanu leaned forward slightly. Elijah, I've been in your position before. When I was young, opportunities came faster than I knew how to manage, and there were days I felt like I didn't deserve any of it. But someone helped me through it. Someone believed I could handle more than I thought I could. Elijah lifted his eyes. Who helped you? A friend, Keanu said. someone who stayed steady when everything else felt uncertain. He let out a quiet breath. I never forgot what that support meant. And I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to help someone else climb out of a dark place, I would. Elijah stared at him for a long moment, trying to make sense of the kindness that kept showing up again and again in this man who owed him nothing. Why are you helping me this much? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu didn't hesitate. Because someone once helped me when I needed it. This is how we keep hope alive. The words struck Elijah deeper than he expected. They didn't sound poetic or rehearsed. They sounded lived, honest, the kind of truth a person carries for years. Elijah blinked hard, fighting the sting in his eyes. I don't know how to repay you. You don't, Keanu said. You just live. You keep singing. You pass it forward when the time comes. Elijah nodded slowly, his heart full in a way he had forgotten was possible. He looked again at the folder, the apartment key tucked neatly inside. A life he thought was over was beginning again, and he wasn't beginning it alone. The days that followed felt unreal for Elijah. He had spent years believing his life had shrunk into a single, narrow path, one bridge, one guitar, one endless stretch of concrete. Now that same world felt impossibly wide. Every morning brought new offers, new invitations, new voices asking him to sign something or trust something or appear somewhere. It was overwhelming, exciting, and terrifying all at once. Keanu stayed close, not as a manager or a celebrity shield, but as a steady presence. Someone who made the chaos feel less like a storm and more like a tide. On the third morning after the Ember Room performance, they made their way to a series of label meetings scheduled across Los Angeles. The first meeting took place in a sleek high-rise overlooking the city. The lobby alone looked like a showroom, marble floors, glass walls, and a receptionist dressed like she belonged in a fashion magazine. Elijah felt underdressed in his clean but simple clothes, but Keanu gave him a quiet nod of reassurance as they entered the main conference room. The executives were already waiting. Their smiles were wide, their pitches rehearsed. They complimented Elijah's voice, praised his authenticity, and then shifted quickly to numbers, streams, marketing strategies, viral moments they could capitalize on. They spoke with enthusiasm, but something about the tone made Elijah uneasy. It felt less like they were welcoming him, and more like they were studying him, like he was a product, not a person. At one point, Elijah asked about creative control. The room grew quiet for a moment before the lead executive offered a polished answer that didn't quite say yes or no. Elijah felt a sinking weight in his stomach. They loved the buzz around him, not the man himself. When they walked out of the building, Elijah let out a slow breath. I don't know, he said quietly. It didn't feel right. Keanu nodded. Trust that feeling. The second meeting happened later that afternoon. Different label, different building, same polished pitch. This time the executives talked about branding and image shifts. One even suggested Elijah should consider updating his look to match current trends. Elijah stared at his own hands, the same hands that had played songs through cold nights, and wondered why anyone thought he needed to become someone else just to sing. Keanu watched Elijah carefully through each meeting. He saw the tension in Elijah's shoulders, the polite nods hiding confusion, the way his fingers tapped against his knee whenever something felt wrong. Keanu didn't intervene. He wanted Elijah to hear, to observe, to listen to his instincts, because instincts mattered more than promises. By the fourth meeting, Elijah was exhausted. Every room felt the same, bright, polished, filled with people who wanted to profit from the spark he had lit on stage, but didn't truly understand what that spark cost him to create. As they left the final tower, Elijah leaned against a street lamp, closing his eyes. Maybe I'm not cut out for this industry, he whispered. It feels like they want the performance, but not the person. Keanu stood beside him, letting the quiet settle. There are good people in the industry, he said softly. You just haven't met the right one yet. Elijah looked doubtful. Are you sure someone like that exists? Keanu smiled gently. You'll see. And the next morning, Elijah did. The next morning, Elijah and Keanu arrived at a small brick building tucked between a family-owned bakery and a thrift shop. It didn't look like a labeled headquarters. There were no tinted windows, no neon signs, no luxury cars in the lot. Just a simple wooden door with a small sign above it that read, Truth Stone Records. Elijah glanced at Keanu. This is a label. Keanu nodded. A different kind, one I trust. Inside the waiting room was warm and unpretentious. Vinyl records lined the walls, not as decoration, but as memories. Albums from unknown artists beside Grammy winners. Photos of musicians playing in living rooms instead of arenas. A coffee maker that looked like it had been used 1,000 times. It felt lived in, human real. A woman in her 40s entered the room with a gentle smile. She wore jeans, a soft flannel shirt, and a silver bracelet with a single stone at its center. Her eyes were warm, but sharp. The eyes of someone who had seen the world at its hardest and chosen kindness anyway. Elijah Cross, she asked. He nodded nervously. I'm Mariah Stone, she said, founder of Truth Stone. I'm really glad you came. She led them into her office, a small room with a piano in the corner and stacks of handwritten lyrics on the desk. Not contracts, not agendas. Lyrics. Before we talk business, Mariah began, I want to hear you. Not the version on live streams, not the viral clip everyone is sharing. You. Right now. Elijah hesitated, then lifted his guitar. He sang a few verses of Walls Can Hear His Voice, softer than the night of the showcase, but no less honest. When he finished, Mariah sat back, visibly moved. Thank you, she said. That was real. Unlike the executives the day before, she didn't immediately jump into numbers or marketing plans. Instead, she asked about his writing process, his influences, his fears, and what kind of music he wanted to make, if no one else's opinion mattered. Elijah found himself talking more than he expected, about his mother, about faith, about the years of silence, when singing was the only thing that made him feel alive. Mariah listened without interrupting. When he finished, she took a slow breath. Elijah, I built this label because I grew up in foster care. I spent years feeling invisible. Music saved me. So I promised myself I would only represent artists who care more about truth than fame. You don't owe me a hit record. You just owe yourself honesty. Elijah blinked, stunned. Mariah continued, I can't offer the biggest paycheck. I can't promise stadium tours, but I can promise freedom. Your voice, your songs, your story, unchanged. Keanu watched Elijah carefully. He saw the way his shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. Later, outside the building, Elijah stood quietly before speaking. I think. That's the one. Keanu smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. When the announcement went public, critics applauded Elijah for choosing integrity over money. Keanu simply nodded, proud, not of the fame Elijah was gaining, but of the man he was becoming. The first time Elijah stepped into the Truth Stone recording studio, he froze just inside the doorway. The room felt larger than any space he had stood in for years. The walls were covered in sound-absorbing panels shaped like small mountains. Microphones hung from steel arms, positioned with precision. Cables snaked across the polished floor like quiet veins. Monitors glowed with soft, steady light. Everything felt intentional, delicate, almost sacred. Elijah tightened his grip on the guitar case he carried. It was the same instrument he had played under a bridge, but today it felt like it was being carried into a temple. He swallowed hard, unsure of whether he deserved to be there. Mariah Stone walked up beside him, noticing the stiffness in his shoulders. It's just a room, she said softly. But what happens in it is what matters. And that part, that's yours. Elijah nodded, but the unease didn't lift entirely. He had never imagined himself standing in a professional studio, surrounded by equipment worth more than everything he owned. Part of him felt like an imposter who might break something if he breathed too hard. Mariah guided him toward the center booth. This is your space, she said. We're not here to shape you into someone new. We're here to capture who you already are. He looked around the room again, taking in the quiet hum of machines, warming up the soft glow of lamps. the faint smell of wood and old vinyl that lingered from earlier sessions. There was a table in the corner with tea notebooks, pencils, and blankets details that made the room feel less intimidating and more like a refuge. Just as Elijah set his guitar down, the studio door opened and Keanu stepped inside holding 2 cups of tea. His presence felt like a steadying weight on the ground beneath Elijah's feet. "Thought you might need this," Keanu said, handing him a cup. Elijah exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "This place is overwhelming." Keanu smiled. "It's only a room until you sing. After that, it becomes yours." Those words sank deep. Elijah stepped into the recording booth. The glass window separated him from the control room where Mariah and her team watched with anticipation. He slid on the headphones, feeling his hands tremble slightly as he adjusted the microphone. The moment felt impossibly big, like the start of something he had once given up hoping for. Mariah's voice crackled gently through the headphones. "Whenever you're ready, Elijah." He closed his eyes, and for the first time he began recording the song that had lived with him longer than most memories. "Walls can hear." The first verse caught in his throat, thin and shaky. He stopped, taking a breath. Keanu lifted a hand from the other side of the glass, just a small, encouraging gesture. Elijah inhaled again, deeper this time. He tried once more. This time, the note carried. It filled the room with something raw and unfiltered, something lived, something survived. Mariah slowly lowered her head into her hands as the verse unfolded, not out of frustration, out of emotion she didn't expect. Elijah kept singing, unaware that in the control room 2 producers were already wiping tears from their cheeks. When Elijah finished the first take, he stepped back from the microphone, breathless. His heart pounded the way it had on stage at the Ember Room, but here the feeling was different, quieter, more intimate, as if the walls were leaning in to listen rather than judge. Mariah clicked the intercom. Her voice was gentle, almost hushed. "Elijah, that was beautiful. But I don't want you to think about perfection today. I want you to think about truth. Sing it like no one will ever hear it except the version of you that survived the hardest nights." Elijah nodded slowly. That version of him, the one who sat alone in the shadows with only his guitar for warmth, still lived inside him. He took another breath, repositioned the microphone, and began again. With each take, something loosened in his chest. His voice grew steadier. His tone deepened. He began allowing himself to feel the memories behind the lyrics instead of running from them. The booth no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a release. Keanu stayed nearby through every session. Sometimes he sat in the corner with tea, offering the kind of quiet companionship that asked for nothing. Sometimes he paced the hallway, giving Elijah space, but always close enough for Elijah to feel anchored. And sometimes he stood beside the control panel, listening with eyes closed, absorbing each note like it was a prayer. Over the next weeks, Elijah recorded 12 songs. Each one was a piece of his past written in the years when music was the only way he knew how to speak. One song was about the loneliness of sleeping beneath highway lights. Another was about the strangers who showed him unexpected kindness. One was about grief, raw, unedited, still sharp around the edges. Another was about faith, not just spiritual faith, but faith in life, in second chances, in the possibility of rebuilding. Every day he returned to the studio, and every day he uncovered another part of himself he thought he had lost. What surprised him the most was how deeply the producers responded. These were professionals who had heard thousands of voices, artists from around the world, come through their doors. Yet more than once, Mariah had to step away to collect herself. One afternoon, she simply sat on the floor outside the booth, wiping tears with the sleeve of her shirt. "It feels like watching history being made," one engineer whispered after a particularly emotional take. Elijah overheard him and shook his head in disbelief. He still struggled to accept that his life had changed so drastically that people now listened to him not out of pity, but because they felt something real when he sang. One evening after he finished recording the final track, he sat in the booth for a long time before removing his headphones. The studio lights were dimmer now. The world felt softer. Mariah entered quietly. "We have the album," she said. 12 songs, 12 stories. All yours. Elijah looked through the glass where Keanu waited with a faint smile. The title came to him without hesitation. Walls Can Hear. A record not about fame, but about survival. And for the first time, he felt ready for the world to hear it. Truth. Stone Records wasted no time planning Elijah's first live appearance after the Ember Room, but they didn't choose a glamorous venue or a high-profile award show. Instead, they selected a charity concert supporting homeless outreach programs across Los Angeles. It was a decision rooted in Elijah's story, not his fame, and Mariah believed it created a stage where his truth could breathe. When Elijah heard the plan, his stomach twisted with a deeper anxiety than he had felt in the Ember Room. Performing for strangers was one thing. Performing at an event tied to a life he had barely escaped felt like standing in front of a mirror he wasn't ready to face. The morning of the concert, he sat in the green room, staring at his reflection. The stage clothes laid out for him were simple: a clean shirt, dark jeans, a jacket that fit well, but didn't pretend to be anything fancy. He looked like himself, but a version still caught between worlds. Not the man who used to sleep under bridges, not yet the man the world wanted him to become. Keanu entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of herbal tea. "Thought you could use this," he said. Elijah accepted the cup with a shaky breath. "I'm not scared to sing," he admitted. "I'm scared of who might see me. People who knew me when I was at my worst. What if they just pity me?" Keanu sat beside him, thoughtful for a moment. "It's not pity if they see you standing. If they see how far you've come, they won't look down on you. They'll look up." Elijah shook his head. "You don't know some of the people from my past. I don't want to see their faces in the crowd. I don't want to see that look, the one that says, they remember who I used to be." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Elijah, you're not performing tonight to erase your past. You're performing because you survived it. This stage is not a reminder of where you were. It's proof of where you are." Elijah let the words settle. Part of him believed them. Another part still trembled. Mariah entered a moment later, bringing final soundcheck notes. She noticed Elijah's tension and softened. "This audience isn't here to judge you," she said. "They're people who understand struggle, people who have lived close to the edge themselves. You're not singing to impress them. You're singing to give them something real." Elijah nodded, but the knot in his chest didn't fully loosen. As showtime approached, the venue filled with people: donors, volunteers, outreach workers, shelter, leaders, and individuals who had once lived the same life Elijah survived. The energy was warm, but heavy, charged with stories and losses and hopes too big for words. Elijah could feel that energy even backstage. When he peeked through the curtain, he saw faces he didn't recognize and a few he thought he might. His breath caught sharply. The fear he had been trying to suppress rose again, cold and gripping. Keanu stepped beside him, calm, grounding. "Whatever you're feeling," he said, "use it." Elijah turned to him. "What if I break on stage?" "Then you break," Keanu replied, "and you keep singing, because that's what courage looks like." Something inside Elijah eased, not entirely, but enough to help him take the first step. And when the host called his name, he tightened his grip on his guitar and walked toward the light. The applause that met Elijah as he stepped onto the stage was warm but gentle, not explosive like at the Ember Room. It felt more like an embrace than a celebration. The audience didn't rise or shout. They simply waited for him, offering him the kind of quiet welcome that made the moment feel deeply personal. Elijah approached the microphone slowly. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. The lights weren't blinding tonight. They were soft, allowing him to see the faces before him. Men and women who had slept on sidewalks, volunteers who had spent years handing out blankets and food, donors who wanted to help but didn't always know how, social workers who had fought battles no one ever talked about, people carrying stories just like his. He swallowed hard, feeling the tremor inside him. His instinct was to hide his past, but that wasn't why he was here. Not tonight. He leaned into the microphone. "My name is Elijah Cross," he said quietly. Some of you know what it's like to feel unseen. Some of you help the unseen stand again. Tonight, I want to sing for all of you." There was a soft murmur across the room. Not applause, just connection. He lifted his guitar and began with Walls Can Hear. The notes floated gently across the room, landing in places deeper than words. People bowed their heads. Others closed their eyes. Some held hands. When he finished the song, he paused, breathing deeply. He wasn't trembling anymore. "I wrote the next song during one of the hardest nights of my life," he said. "But tonight, I don't sing it from that place. I sing it from where I am now." He played Mother's Window, and halfway through he saw a man in the third row wipe tears from his beard. A woman further back pressed a tissue against her face. Volunteers held on to one another. Even some of the donors, dressed sharply and usually reserved, felt the weight of the lyrics in their chests. The room felt united not by Elijah's story alone, but by the collective understanding of struggle, loss, and resilience. When the final chord echoed into silence, Elijah stepped back from the microphone. "I dedicate this performance," he said softly, "to the people who live unseen. May you know that your life, your voice, your story matter." For a moment, no one moved. Then the audience rose, not in a roaring ovation, but in a slow rising wave of respect. A standing tribute, soft and reverent, made of gratitude rather than spectacle. Backstage, Keanu watched with quiet pride. He had hoped Elijah would find his voice. He hadn't expected him to find his purpose. Donations surged that very night, tripling the charity's goal. But more importantly, something shifted inside Elijah. He realized the stage wasn't just a platform, it was a responsibility. Music could open doors, but truth could open hearts, and Elijah was ready to carry both. Elijah didn't notice fame arriving. It didn't knock. It didn't announce itself. It began as a whisper, shares, retweets, interviews requested, then grew into something far larger and louder than he ever imagined. Within weeks of releasing his first single from the upcoming album, his face appeared on morning shows, magazine covers, and digital billboards. The world wanted to hear him. The world wanted to know him. And for a time, it felt overwhelming in a good way. But then came the pressure. The more visible he became, the more opinions swirled around him. Some praised his authenticity. Some called him a miracle of the music world. Others, however, looked for flaws. Skeptics questioned his talent. Commentators mocked his past. Tabloids ran headlines that twisted his story into something sensational, cruel, or exploitive. One morning, Elijah woke to a headline that felt like a punch to the chest. Homeless singer turned project of Keanu Reeves, is it all? Just a PR move. Another outlet published old photos of him sleeping on the street, taken without his knowledge. A gossip site mocked his clothes. Another mocked his voice, calling it emotionally manipulative. He tried to ignore the noise. He tried to stay grounded. But old wounds have a way of reopening when touched by cruelty. During a rehearsal one afternoon, Elijah's hands began shaking so badly he couldn't hold his guitar. His throat tightened. His breath turned shallow. A panic he hadn't felt in months clawed its way back to the surface. The room spun, and for a moment he felt as though he had been pulled back into the shadows of a cold underpass. Mariah rushed to him, but Elijah stepped back, apologizing over and over, unable to even explain what was happening. That night, alone in his apartment, Elijah stared at the glowing screen of his phone until the comments blurred. His chest ached with the familiar heaviness of shame. He thought he had escaped this feeling. He thought success meant safety. But now he understood how fragile progress could be. He turned off his phone and sat on the floor, gripping his guitar as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. The next morning, Keanu arrived unannounced. Elijah opened the door, eyes red from lack of sleep. "I'm fine," he whispered automatically, but his voice cracked. Keanu didn't push past him. He didn't lecture. He simply stepped inside the apartment and sat on the floor directly across from him. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was recognition of pain, of pressure, of the kind of emotional spiraling that comes from being pulled between past and present. "You don't have to talk yet," Keanu said softly. "I'm here. That's enough for now." Elijah lowered his head. I thought I was stronger than this. You are, Keanu answered, but even strong people bend under weight they never asked for. A quiet moment passed before Keanu added, pack a bag. We're leaving for a few days. Elijah blinked in confusion. Where are we going? Somewhere the noise can't reach you. Elijah didn't argue. Something in Keanu's voice, calm but unwavering, told him that resistance would only prolong the heaviness already weighing him down. He packed a small bag, just clothes, a notebook, and his guitar, then followed Keanu down the stairwell and into the quiet morning air. Neither spoke during the drive. The silence wasn't tense. It was restorative, like a blanket placed gently over frayed nerves. They headed north, leaving Los Angeles behind. The city skyline faded into rolling hills, then into the towering pines of Northern California. The farther they drove, the more Elijah felt the pressure lift, not entirely, but enough to breathe. Keanu eventually turned onto a long gravel path that led to a secluded cabin tucked between ancient trees. The structure was simple, weather-worn, and peaceful. No cameras, no crowds, no noise. This place saved me once, Keanu said as they stepped out of the car. Thought it might help you, too. Elijah looked around, taking in the stillness. The only sounds were wind brushing through the branches and the soft clicking of the cabin's old wind chimes. Something about the quiet made his chest loosen. Inside the cabin was modest but warm. A stone fireplace, a wooden table marked with years of use, shelves filled with books. Elijah sat on the couch, running his hands over the woven blanket draped across it. Keanu lit a fire and sat across from him. Talk to me when you're ready, he said. It took a while before Elijah found words. I thought I could handle the attention, he whispered, but every headline feels like someone rewriting who I am. Every comment feels like they're dragging me back into a life I fought so hard to leave. I know I should ignore it, but I can't stop seeing those pictures. The ones of me on the street. Keanu nodded. You're human, Elijah. Not a machine. Fame doesn't erase old wounds. It just gives the world more ways to touch them. Elijah swallowed, his voice trembling. What if I'm not strong enough for this? What if the world expects someone I can't be? Keanu leaned forward, eyes steady. You don't owe the world a perfect version of yourself. You owe them the honest one. Elijah felt something inside him shift, a slow, painful uncoiling. But they want perfection. No, Keanu said. People only pretend to want perfection. What they truly connect with is truth. You sang truth. You lived truth. And you're allowed to struggle. You're allowed to step back. You're allowed to protect yourself. The words hit Elijah with a gentleness he wasn't used to. His shoulders sagged, his breathing softened. Keanu continued, The noise will always be there, but you don't have to let it drown you. You get to choose where your voice comes from. Not fear, not fame, but heart. Elijah closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, some of the fog had cleared. The ache was still there, but now it felt like something he could walk through instead of something he was sinking into. Thank you, he whispered. Keanu gave a small nod. We'll stay as long as you need. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The world felt wider again, and Elijah, for the first time in weeks, felt like he could breathe without fear of breaking. A full year passed, yet the memory of that cold November night lived in Elijah Cross's heart as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. The underpass, the cracked guitar, the darkness that felt permanent, and then the footsteps that changed everything. Now, on the anniversary of that moment, Elijah stood backstage at the Horizon Theater, the venue chosen for the nationwide benefit concert supporting homeless musicians across America. It was sold out. Not because he was famous now, but because people believed in the cause he was raising his voice for. The stage manager signaled 10 minutes until showtime. Elijah nodded, smoothing the sleeves of his simple black shirt. He still dressed simply intentionally, avoiding the glitz that came with success. He wanted to look like himself, not a polished version created by a stylist. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up his guitar, the same one Keanu had restored for him. The wood felt warm under his touch, familiar and grounding. He whispered a quiet prayer, not for success, but for purpose. Let someone out there hear what they need to hear tonight. Outside in the dimly lit auditorium, people were settling into their seats. Some were longtime supporters of Elijah's journey. Others were hearing him live for the first time. And one man sitting in the far back corner near the aisle kept his hat pulled low over his forehead to avoid attention. Keanu Reeves didn't want recognition. He never did. He came to witness, not to be witnessed. Elijah didn't know exactly where Keanu was seated, but he knew he was there. He could feel it in the same way someone can sense the presence of the person who once reached into the deepest part of their darkness and pulled them back to the surface. Backstage, Elijah breathed deeply. He remembered the retreat in Northern California, the conversations about truth, fear, and healing. He remembered the panic he felt months ago when tabloids resurfaced pictures of him sleeping near dumpsters, turning his past into cruel spectacle. It was Keanu, steady as ever, who told him not to let the world narrate his life for him. Now he was here about to use the very voice he once tried to hide to raise money for people walking the same hard roads he had walked. The lights dimmed. The announcer stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we gather for a purpose greater than ourselves, a purpose of music, humanity, and second chances. Please welcome the headliner of our Homeless Musicians Benefit Concert, Elijah Cross. The crowd erupted in applause. Not a screaming roar, but a warm, rising wave of respect and admiration. The kind that comes from people who aren't here for spectacle. They're here because they believe in the man stepping onto the stage. Elijah walked out slowly, his guitar strapped across his shoulder. The brightness of the stage lights momentarily blinded him, but once they softened, he could see the blurred outlines of the audience. He smiled gently, then stepped toward the microphone. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice calm but emotional. "Tonight isn't about fame. It's about remembering the voices we overlook every day." He strummed the opening chord of Walls Can Hear the Song that shattered the world open for him. The room fell into perfect stillness. He sang with a depth shaped by suffering and softened by gratitude. His voice carried the same rawness Keanu heard under the underpass that night, but now it carried something else too: hope, strength, identity. When the final note faded, the entire auditorium remained silent for a heartbeat. Then applause thundered like a breaking wave. Elijah closed his eyes, feeling the moment settle into his heart. And then he said softly, "I have one more song tonight. A new one." Elijah adjusted the microphone, his breath unsteady, as he cradled the guitar closer to his chest. "I wrote this song for someone who changed my life," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Someone who didn't just hear me, but listened. Someone who reminded me that a broken voice can still tell the truth." A quiet murmur rippled through the audience. Many already suspected who he meant. He took a slow breath and began strumming a gentle, reverent melody. The theater softened into silence. Each note felt like a confession, a gratitude shaped into sound. Elijah's voice rose warm and aching. This is called "The Man Who Stopped to Listen." The lyrics painted the moment under the bridge with vivid honesty. The cold night, the cracked guitar, the footsteps that paused instead of passing by, the stranger who offered warmth without asking anything in return, the man who restored not just a guitar, but a life losing its thread. The audience leaned forward, pulled by the intimacy of the song. It wasn't just musical storytelling, it was a thank you letter written in melody. And in the far back row, Keanu lowered his eyes, humbled, overwhelmed, that Elijah would share something so personal in front of thousands. When Elijah reached the final verse, his voice broke slightly, just enough to reveal the depth behind it. "He heard the hurt I tried to hide. He saw the fight I'd lost inside. He gave me time. He gave me choice. He gave my silence back its voice." The last chord hung in the air like a prayer. Then the room erupted. People stood instantly. Some were crying openly. Others clapped with hands pressed against their hearts. A few simply stood in awe at the raw humanity they had just witnessed. Elijah blinked through tears and stepped back from the microphone. "Thank you," he whispered. But before I leave this stage, I need to thank the man who believed in me when nobody else did." The camera swung toward the audience as Elijah lifted a hand toward the back row. To Keanu Reeves, he said softly, "The man who stopped to listen." Keanu bowed his head, almost embarrassed by the attention, but unable to hide the emotion shining in his eyes. He gave a small nod, one that said, "This is your moment, not mine." But everyone knew the truth. Without that moment under the bridge, none of this would exist. And tonight they witnessed the full circle miracle of what happens when one man chooses compassion instead of indifference. The concert hall emptied slowly, still echoing with the last notes of Elijah's tribute. People lingered in the aisles, wiping tears from their eyes, whispering to one another about what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just music, it was something deeper, a reminder that every life, no matter how broken, carries a melody waiting for someone to hear it. Keanu slipped out quietly through a side exit before the crowd could recognize him. He pulled up the hood of his jacket, letting the cool night air settle against his skin. It was a calm, steady cold, different from the chill under the bridge a year ago. This cold felt clean, almost cleansing. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, replaying the moments of the evening in his mind. He thought about Elijah standing on that stage, no longer the man who once flinched at the idea of being seen. He stood tall now. He sang with conviction. He told the truth without apology, and the world listened. Keanu couldn't help but smile at the irony. Elijah always thanked him for stopping that night, but Keanu often felt like he was the one who received a gift. As he walked past late-night cafes and quiet storefronts, Keanu reflected on how everything began with something so small. A voice carried through concrete walls, a pause in the middle of a dark walkway, a choice to listen instead of pass by. It wasn't heroic, it wasn't grand, but sometimes the smallest moments decide the direction of someone's entire life. He thought about his sister Kim, the nights he sat in hospital corridors afraid to speak, afraid to break, afraid to hope. Music had held him together then, soft melodies, quiet hymns, songs that carried him through grief. It was why Elijah's voice struck so deeply the night he heard it. Pain recognizes pain, hope recognizes hope. And something in Elijah's voice had awakened both in him. A year had passed since then, and Elijah had not wasted a moment. He didn't chase fame, he didn't drown in attention. Instead, he built something lasting. The Walls Can Hear Foundation, dedicated to supporting homeless musicians, had already helped dozens of artists find housing, counseling, instruments, and community. Elijah funded the first programs himself, using proceeds from his album. Keanu had quietly donated as well, but he refused any public acknowledgement. Elijah's second album was already in production. Early demos revealed a sound more confident, more textured. Songs about redemption, faith, and belonging. Critics said Elijah Cross was becoming one of the most emotionally honest storytellers of the decade, but Elijah rarely spoke about success. When interviewers asked how he rose from homelessness to global attention, he always gave the same answer. "I wasn't rescued," he said. "I was heard." Keanu repeated those words now in his mind, letting them settle inside him. He walked slower, absorbing the weight of them. Being heard, really heard, was something the world forgot how to give. People shouted opinions, demanded attention, filled silence with noise. But listening? That was different. Listening meant seeing someone's humanity before judging their circumstances. It meant giving them space to breathe, even when they felt invisible. By the time Keanu reached the quiet streets near his home, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. Tonight wasn't his story. It never had been. It was Elijah's. It was the story of a man who rebuilt his life through song, faith, and courage. A man who now lifted others with the same compassion he had been given. And as Keanu stepped into the soft glow of a street lamp, he whispered a quiet thought to himself. Maybe the world doesn't change in big ways. Maybe it changes one voice at a time. Keanu continued down the sidewalk, passing a mural of painted musical notes, drifting into a sky of bright colors. It reminded him of Elijah's mother, a woman he had never met but felt connected to, through every lyric Elijah sang. She had been the source of his earliest melodies, the gentle voice who told him he had a gift long before the world noticed. Keanu imagined her hearing her son now filling rooms across America with songs that rose from the deepest parts of his life. He hoped she would be proud. Near the end of the street, a busker strummed a guitar. The notes were simple, almost hesitant. A small crowd listened politely. Keanu paused for a moment, watching the young man sing, his voice soft but earnest. It struck him how many people carried stories the world never discovered. For every Elijah Cross, there were thousands more waiting for someone to stop and see them. He placed a folded bill into the busker's case, offering a small nod of encouragement before continuing home. The moment felt symbolic, as if life were reminding him that compassion wasn't meant to be rare or heroic. It was meant to be constant, consistent, quiet. As Keanu reached his driveway, he looked back at the street behind him. He wondered how many lives could change if people slowed down just once a day, if they truly looked at one another, if they listened not with impatience or judgment, but with openness. Elijah's journey wasn't a miracle. It was a chain reaction started by attention, continued by kindness, and strengthened by courage. He stepped inside his home, set down his keys, and let out a long breath. Tonight had been overwhelming in the best way. Not because of applause or praise, but because of what it meant. Elijah had become a voice for the unheard, a symbol for people who felt forgotten, a reminder that talent and worth weren't defined by circumstance. They were defined by the soul behind them. Before turning off the lights, Keanu whispered one final reflection into the stillness of the room. Everyone carries a song the world needs. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to hear it. And now, for the viewers watching this story, 2 questions remain. Have you ever met someone whose story changed the way you see the world? And what story would you like to see Keanu Reeves in next?